community comes together. The global community comes together to reflect on the urgent need for actions to address these interconnections. So once again, welcome. I'm Donna King-Brathwaite. I will be your moderator for today's discussion. And we do have some panelists with us, and I'd like to say good morning to them as well and welcome. I'm going to do a very brief introduction so that you know who our panelists are for today. And hopefully we will shortly also hear a word from, oh yes, and he's here. We do have our United Nations Development Program representative who will give us some brief remarks from the UNDP. So welcome, please, Mr. Mohamed Nagdi, Head of Sustainable Solutions, Energy and Climate Change Program for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean at the United Nations Development Program. Welcome, Mohamed, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Donna. Good morning to our panelists and also to participants this morning. So welcome to the second of four leadership dialogues that we hope will be collaborative and multi-stakeholder with a focus on the recommendations that contribute to environmental dimensions of the SDGs. So as many of you would know, the UN General Assembly would have agreed to convene an international meeting entitled Stockholm +50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity in Stockholm on the 2nd and 3rd of June, so just in a few months from now, during the week of World Environment Day. And this meeting seeks to commemorate 50 years since the convening of the UN Conference on Human Environment, and is also designed to help accelerate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals during the decade of action, including through sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think today's consultations are very much in line with that. So the government of Sweden will host the meeting with the support of the government of Kenya. And the meeting will reinforce the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the creation of UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. So Barbados is one of only 2 islands in the region that will be participating in this global initiative, the next being Trinidad and Tobago. And I think that it overstates the importance for Barbados to provide a robust policy support to the implementation of to the output of these Stockholm +50 discussions, as we really do represent the other smaller and developing states in the region. So the objective of the national consultations is to stimulate an inclusive whole of society and whole of government dialogue on the main themes of the Stockholm +50 as they relate to the national context. And this will be achieved through both virtual and in-person platforms for ideas, insight, and of course, innovation. With most of the consultations being virtual, and there will be an in-person consultation on May 3rd at the Hilton Hotel with a major focus or main focus towards the youth and their input towards the leadership dialogues. So UNDP has been asked to facilitate the national consultation using resources provided by the government of Sweden and in partnership with the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification for Barbados. And really a sincere thanks to the ministry who has, and their colleagues, their counterparts, their focal points, Travis, the minister himself, who have endorsed these consultations completely. And I don't think that we would have gotten to this point without their full support. So the leadership dialogue should stimulate meaningful debates at different levels with a range of stakeholders. And yesterday was the first one, which reflected on the urgent need for actions to achieve a healthy planet and prosperity for all. And today is based on and focused around achieving a sustainable and inclusive recovery from the coronavirus disease, so COVID-19 pandemic. Tomorrow, from 10 till 12, we will be having the third virtual dialogue, which will be focused on accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development. So the timeline for Stockholm +50 preparations coincide with a critical period for our countries and their global commitments under the Paris Agreement on climate change. So countries, or most countries, have revised and enhanced their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, ahead of COP26, which was in Glasgow in November 2021. So these really define critical targets for countries and identify strategies for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And as we all know, within the region, it's 1.5 to stay alive. So adapting to potential climate impacts and ensuring financial flows required to achieving these global targets. So these pledges reflect and are integrated into the NDCs, into sectoral development policies, strategies, budgets, and targets, including other environmental commitments. And the NDCs are critical gateways for ambitious action, not only to achieve the Paris Agreement, but also the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. So they offer key political signals on the direction of development that countries plan to take. And the targets in the NDCs on energy, adaptation, nature-based solutions, gender, and other areas provide a national pathway to transform economies and societies and contribute to many of the outcomes of the Stockholm Plus 50 process. As such, the ongoing revision and planning and implementation processes also provide a strong foundation for Stockholm Plus 50 meeting preparations. So the UNDP, we recognize that the NDCs are a critical gateway for ambitious action, not just to achieve the Paris Agreement, but towards the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. I know I said that before, but I want to say it again before I end my opening remarks, because that's very key. And the discussions and critical points raised during these leadership dialogues will inform them. I'd also like to end by thanking Professor Winston Moore and Ms. Crystal Drakes, Travis Sinclair, partners from the Ministry of the Environment, for their support in the leadership and dialogue. Also, let me also single out the partnership with the University of the West Indies as critical in ensuring that these consultations are successful. So we look forward to robust discussions led by our panelists with strong input from our participants. Thank you, one and all. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. So ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, I'd like to introduce to you the persons who will be forming our panel for today. I'm just going to give their names and titles. If panelists, if you're here and you want to switch your cameras on, I see that 2 of you have your cameras on so far, so that our audience and our participants can see who you are. Thank you very much for joining us. So after this intro, we'll be taking a quick look at what Stockholm Plus 50 is really about via a very short video. So let's begin then. Today joining us as our panelists are, first up, Mr. Patrick Mccaskey, the Director of Research and Planning, the Division of Economic Affairs with the Ministry of Finance, Government of Barbados. Ms. Carrie-Anne Eiffel, former President of the Senate of Barbados and currently the President of the Barbados Council for the Disabled. Mr. John Marshall, President of the Barbados Manufacturing Association. Pardon me. Ms. Adriana Thomas, International PAHO Consultant, Coordinator, PAHO and WHO Office for the Subregional Program Coordination of the Caribbean. And participating today as a respondent is Dr. Marcia Hines, postdoctoral fellow with a specialization in gender, University of Guelph. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. And now we'll take a look at the video entitled Stockholm 1972, When Environmental Protection Was Born. Okay, we may be having some technical difficulties.
I'm getting it done. Apologies.
Okay, that's all right.
1 second.
Yes. As we've been living in the tech world for the last 2 years, just about anything is possible. But luckily, we've managed to get work done. We've managed to stay in touch. But I'm one who really believes that there's nothing that beats face to face. So here we go. Enjoy.
In 1972, global leaders came together in Sweden for the first ever United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. It was unlike any previous event, bringing together 113 governments to discuss humanity's impact on the natural world.
It is clear that the environmental crisis which is confronting the world will profoundly alter the future destiny of our planet. No one amongst us, whatever our status, strength, or circumstance, can remain unaffected.
The human environment will always change. Development will continue. There will be growth. This cannot and should not be avoided. The decisive question is in which direction we will develop, by what means we will grow, which qualities we want to achieve, and what values we wish to guide our future.
I think the lasting message of the Stockholm Conference will be the realization that man has come to one of those seminal points in his history where his own activities are the principal determinants of his own future.
Now, 50 years after that Stockholm meeting, we face a triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, as well as other planetary ills that are affecting our current and future well-being.
This triple crisis is our number one existential threat, and we need an urgent, all-out effort to turn things around.
An unhealthy planet threatens human health, prosperity, equality, and peace, as we have seen only too clearly in COVID-19. It also threatens the achievement of SDGs. In this moment of truth, we need to urgently work to transform our economies and societies. The science is clear. The solutions are known. We need whole of society action for a whole of society problem. We know it can be done. The world came together to fix the ozone layer, phase out leaded fuel, and stop endangered species from going extinct. With this in mind, the UN General Assembly has decided to convene an international meeting entitled Stockholm +50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity. It will be held in Stockholm, Sweden, from the 2nd till the 3rd of June 2022. It will commemorate the 50 years since that 1972 watershed moment when the environment took center stage for the first time. There is only one Earth, and the stakes have never been higher. Join us.
Thank you very much. So,
In
ladies
19
and gentlemen, before we get into the meat of today's discussion, I'd like to invite you to just participate in a short poll. It would be good for us to have some stats, as it were, on who is here today, who is joining us. So please go ahead. The poll is now available, and we'll just have a couple of minutes to complete it. Thank you. Okay. I can see so far that we seem to have a very diverse set of participants today. So welcome, very happy to have you with us, including members from industry, health, obviously environment, some from tourism, education, very key, and agriculture and food. Great.
Hi, Donna. Jumping in, I see that we have 19 responses so far out of 27. So suggest we just leave another 30 seconds or a minute, and then we can close the poll.
Thank you very much, Sam. That's great. Thank you. Okay. I see that we also have media represented today. This is great. Yes, Sam, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. So at this stage, I think we can start with a brief summary. So we have some youth representatives. We have 3 of them between 19 and 30. The large majority is between 31 and 50. And then some representatives as well from 51 to 65, and 1 of each from 66 to 80 and 80 plus. In terms of gender balance, we can see that there are many more females than males, with 6 males and 15 females today, contrary to yesterday. I would say that the stakeholder groups that are represented are very, very diverse. I think you were able to understand from the way the poll is made that unfortunately there was a limit of 10 responses per question, so I had to do it in 2 questions. You can see the majority comes from NGOs and CSOs. However, we also have government, United Nations, women and women group, as well as science academia and youth groups represented.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Sam. And thank you all for participating in the poll. There will be another poll just a little bit later as we proceed today. So just to set the context, today's focus is on sustainable and inclusive recovery post-COVID-19. Recognizing the diversity of approaches, today's conversation will look at the possible recommendations to achieving sustainable and inclusive recovery. 2 years after COVID first swept across the globe, countries and communities are still recovering from the effects of the pandemic and the national measures taken in response. I think most of us can remember very clearly the major shutdowns and what this caused. Over 100 million jobs have been lost or displaced in formal and informal sectors. Trillions of dollars have been spent to keep businesses, families, and economies afloat. The pandemic has had devastating impacts on the world's food security and nutrition, with over 800 million people in the world facing hunger in 2020, which is over 160 million more than the numbers for 2019. Families and communities living in poverty and in vulnerable contexts now face even more dire survival challenges. The pandemic has taken a disproportionate toll on women and girls and reflects the fragility of progress in gender equality. Many developing countries and households are facing growing levels of unmanageable debt. Our world today continues to be more divided, more unequal, and more unsustainable. Unfortunately, much of the unprecedented fiscal and monetary infusion has only reinforced a business as usual approach. Population growth, urbanization, conflict, climate change, environmental degradation, and increasingly unsustainable patterns of resource extraction, production, and consumption are certainly testing the Earth's resilience. The rapidly deteriorating environment threatens to not only to disrupt our social and economic well-being, but also the achievement of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the protection of basic human rights. The changing climate, biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, increasing levels of pollution, inequality, conflict are all closely related and need to be addressed synergistically. Equally, efforts are needed to scale circular economy approaches to ensure the transition to sustainable consumption and production in alignment with the SDGs, with particular consideration for developing countries, such as small island developing states like Barbados. pro-poor, gender-responsive, inclusive, rights-based approaches are key to ensuring progress towards environmental sustainability and sustainable development that will benefit all people and, of course, benefit the planet. So at this time, I'm going to invite our panelists to give their 5-minute presentations. So first up will be Mr. Patrick Mccaskey, who is the Director of Research and Planning with the Division of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please go right ahead.
Good morning. All protocols observed. I am indeed deeply honored to have been chosen to serve on this distinguished panel of individuals comprising leaders from across sections of our society. Ladies and gentlemen, Barbados, like many other small island developing states, registered important successes in development as we approach the June 22, Stockholm Convention anniversary. Barbados recorded progress in all fronts, namely economic, social, physical, infrastructural, environmental, and governance. Collectively, this progress enabled Barbados to achieve an enviable ranking on the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Index, reaching number 29 among all countries in the 90s. Now, in the wake of successive global and economic crises, the challenges to achieving sustainable and inclusive recovery, growth, and development, and in particular, the risks, have arguably been more difficult for Barbados and other cities than in the past, in part due to global geopolitical, financial, and economic challenges. In addition, climate change accompanied by natural disasters, trade shocks, and of recent vintage COVID-19, which has now been exacerbated by the Russian and Ukraine war, have compromised the capacity of cities and less developed countries, in particular, to access scarce resources such as food, water, and concessional and grant financing. Barbados' economy continued to be challenged owing to the ongoing global pandemic and also the recent natural disasters. Now, while the authorities have been proactive in managing the health crisis, the economic fallout has been significant. The collapse of tourism arrivals from April 2020 onwards sharply reduced economic activity and resulted in a corresponding decrease in government revenues. The economy contracted by 14% in 2020, and the unemployment rate spiked into high double digits. Since 2020, growth has returned and is projected to reach double digits in 2022, buoyed by bullish tourism performance and construction activity. Over the medium term, tourism arrivals are expected to return to normal levels around 2024. Structural reforms and strategic public investments are expected to return growth to its medium-term average of between 2 to 3%. The Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan 2018 contains measures to guarantee sustainable and inclusive growth. As prior to the arrival of COVID-19 in 2018, the government of Barbados under the BERT plan rolled out a suite of policy measures designed to restore economic and social stability and place the country on a path of sustainable and inclusive growth and development. The underlying structural framework underpinning this EFF-IMF supported BERT plan rests on a number of key strategic growth pillars. Firstly, investing in a high-skilled productive and knowledge-based economy, particularly in skills, training, and education. Second, better mobilizing private domestic savings for local investment, particularly in critical climate resilient infrastructure. Thirdly, making government an enabler of growth by improving the ease of doing business, accelerating the speed of government licensing, and increasing the predictability of the fiscal and regulatory environment. And fourthly, diversifying our economy into new areas such as renewable energy, medicinal cannabis, the high value agricultural goods, high tech and software development to complement a renewed vigor for the traditional services sector. And finally, strengthening resilience in natural disasters and climate change. To accompany this BERT plan, transformational anti-poverty and sectoral strategies were aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. These strategies supported greater equality, stronger social protection, broader access to economic advancement and enfranchisement, and provided the gateway for stabilizing the economy and setting the parameters for sustainable pro-growth, inclusive growth. Government's deliberate response to COVID-19 was urgent and measured. The subsequent arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020 into Barbados plunged our economy into a sharp economic recession, cessation of business activity, job losses, and a decline in government's revenue intake. Government therefore reprioritized and reorganized its fiscal expenditures, forged new supply chains, and developed new financing structures in response. Renewed emphasis consistent with global compacts was on embracing new innovative approaches that are growth inclusive and sustainable in a Pareto optimal manner. These compacts were built from the outcomes of all the major United Nations conferences and summits in the economic, social, and environmental fields, especially the Rio Declaration on the Environment and Development, Agenda 21, the Johannesburg Declaration on Sustainable Development 15, and the planned implementation of the World Summit of Sustainable Development, and also the outcome document of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development entitled The Future We Want, Stockholm 50, which has provided us with the opportunity that we have today. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, which exposed structural gaps at the micro and macro economic level within the Barbadian economy, received the urgent attention of government. Government redirected its priorities and refocused its efforts on ensuring that the provision of essential healthcare, welfare accessibility, technological and educational opportunities, and societal necessities were available and accessible to all its citizens to minimize the possible economic and social dislocation that could have quickly become endemic and result in deep pockets of poverty. To facilitate a sustainable, inclusive, and people-centered recovery, new initiatives that are interlinked with the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals were established so that persons were not deprived of the immediate assistance that was necessary. Social safety nets, initiatives for vulnerable families and individuals, as well as businesses, were put in place. These initiatives were prioritized based on the strategic Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 1, Goal 2, Goal 3, 4, 8, 10, Goal 10, 13, and 16, as well as Goal 70, and were categorized within the three broad dimensions of sustainable economic resilience, as well as sustainable social safety net and sustainable environmental resilience to climate change and disaster management. As Barbados was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, the progress of aligning our development achievements with the implementation of the SDGs was being eroded. Goal 8, promoting inclusive and sustainable economic growth and productive employment and decent work for all. Goal 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. And Goal 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. These were prioritized for the achievement of sustainable economic resilience. Decades of development progress was put at risk, and the government was immediately called into action to stabilize the economy. The crisis revealed the strong connection between development, public health care, and the security of nutrition, as well as education and tourism, and the preservation of the entrepreneurship sector, which is a construct of the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise sector. As Michael Spence, who is chair of the Commission on Growth and Development, said, there is no recipe, only ingredients. But evidence at least suggests that these ingredients appear to have been the most relevant to producing inclusive growth. And these include a redistributive agenda. This would include cash transfers, redistributing public expenditure to health, education, agricultural services, and the progressive taxation system. This package would serve to arm poor and marginalized people with the skills to allow them to participate in the development of economic growth and limit the exposure to the downside risks of that growth and recovery. Macroeconomic prudence, also important, which refers to sustainable, achieving sustainable moderate levels of inflation, deficits, as well as debt, and counter-cyclical policies. But at the same time, government must ensure that poor elements of public spending are protected, and a policy environment conducive to poor investment, and in particular, the domestically owned, labor-intensive private sector, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. The building blocks envisaged in BERT 2018 for propelling high and sustainable inclusive recovery and growth over the long term and reaching higher levels of income were instituted by the government of Barbados. And these include creating and ensuring macroeconomic stability, investing in human capital and physical infrastructure, creating an enabling environment for competition and trade, improving and strengthening the financial system, the banks and financial system, facilitating structural reform from agriculture to manufacturing and from the rural to the urban sectors, and as well as adopting modern technology and spurring innovation, building strong and effective institutions and enhancing environmental sustainability, and also ensuring, this is most important, a strong social safety net. So that is my contribution. I await any questions in the next segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Mccaskey. Much food for thought, quite a lot of information that I believe some of us might not have been exposed to at this level. So we really, really thank you for your presentation and look forward to when we get into our discussion segment. Our next panelist that I'm going to call on is Mr. John Marshall, who is the president of the Barbados Manufacturing Association. Please go ahead, John. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate the invitation to join the panel today. Not an expert certainly on the environment or social issues and so on, but I've spent a lot of years in the industry and working for companies that work across the region. Quite often, both in my personal and professional life, when I say we, I usually mean we, the people of the Caribbean, because if any of you have had the opportunity to travel across the Caribbean, you would realize fairly quickly that even though the environment around you changes, it still feels like home. And I feel a lot like that when I do travel across the Caribbean, and I think of us as one. Would want to focus my contribution today on a couple of things. One is, the segment was titled Recovery from COVID, but the truth is the environmental and social issues that we're dealing with, started long before COVID. And for me, it kind of boils down into one key thing, and that's the economic inequality. The inequality as it stands right now for most of the English-speaking world anyhow is actually getting worse. When you look at the level of wealth and income that is concentrated in the top 5 or 1% of the most of the markets, including our own, it's at a level it was at back in the 30s and 40s, and in fact in the US it's back at what the level it was back in the 20s, which is why they are referring to it as the second Gilded Age. And I think that creates a lot of disenfranchisement and so on for people who aren't seeing the mobility that they would like to. They feel as though capitalism has perhaps failed them, and they're not entirely wrong. The way that it's, capitalism is structured, it drives us to the lowest possible unit cost for everything. But unfortunately, the unit cost, and this is kind of how you tie it back into the environment, the unit cost in most cases doesn't include the true cost on the environment and the society that created that good. In some cases, in the best of cases, it's subsidized. In other cases, it's just swept under the carpet, and in many others, the true environmental and social cost isn't known. So when we create goods and services for the world, we are able to get it onto a shelf at a cost that most people will accept and pay for, but we're not showing the true environmental cost of that item in that shelf price. And I think that if we did have a model that allowed us to do that, and a model that I think is inevitable, that people would then be able to make better decisions for the environment. The other thing that I wanted to talk about from an environmental perspective is that, over the past, I would say 50, 60, 70 years, people have tried to fix the environment through trial and error. Even in the early video that we watched, we saw there about the ozones and the reduction of CFCs in aerosols to try and fix that problem, or in leaded fuel, and we introduced catalytic converters and unleaded fuel to try and fix that problem. Back in the early 90s, we switched from paper bags at supermarkets to plastic to try and fix a sustainable forestry problem. That's created another problem. And I think that one of the issues that we have is that we are running out, if not already run out, of the chances to do that trial and error method. And what it would encourage is that whenever we're introducing something new, that we actually think through the full cycle of the use of that material. And and I'll get into more of that in a little bit as well too, but I want to touch base first then on the rules, the way I see it for society. And I think that one of the key problems, this initiative itself was born 50 years ago, is that there's still too few people working on the problems, or I should say recognizing the problems and working on the solutions. And I'm sure everybody who's on the call today is already fairly well aware of a lot of the environmental woes, but there's a lot of folks out there who aren't, and they don't, not that they couldn't care about it, but they don't because they have other higher day-to-day needs to try and satisfy. And I think that our attempts to try and fix the supply chains of the world that became a critical focus in the COVID era can actually help solve some of these problems. So for instance, when we think of providing opportunity for people who exist on or below the poverty line, and try and provide opportunities for them to increase their income and close that income inequality gap, we have to think in terms of the materials that we import in the country and how we use those to then create new materials that are of value and use to us. I think that, from an early age, we probably need to add words like trash and waste and garbage to our list of bad words that children should not say. That those should be, every material that we use for one purpose should be thought of as having value in another. And we should be able to create small cottage industries that can help us convert those items into things of value. Most of the larger countries in the world do that, but they do that on a scale that we can't in the Caribbean. And we need to find ways that allow us to convert plastics and metals and other things at a scale of 10 or 20, 50,000 inhabitants, and be able to reuse them and not have to consolidate 100 million tons worth of trash before we can get to a scale that makes sense for the type of investment that would be needed to recycle it. That's not the scale that we can operate at. We need to be engaging the creative minds across the region that we're so good at. We're fantastic at creating works of art and other things, but the creative mind can be used in processes and how to solve environmental problems as well. We need to be engaging the universities to try and help literally scour the globe for ways of using the waste that we create at scales that we can afford to change those things into value, and then presenting that at an early age to our population so that they can help create those methods of reducing our waste. And I'll give you an example. And this is why I mentioned earlier about the way we need to be thinking cyclically. We have recently put a lot of effort into creating energy from solar, which is great. We've also put a lot of effort into making electric cars more available to individuals, which is also great. All those things are great for reducing greenhouse gases. The issue is that we shouldn't stop there. We need to recognize that those items create waste themselves, and we should be from now putting policies and practices in place to how we're going to reuse those items when they reach their end of life. Current lithium-ion batteries and so on create an enormous amount of waste and very hazardous waste when they're finished, even in the extraction from the earth. But certainly we want to reduce that. We can reduce that by reusing them, and we should be looking at ways at a scale that Barbados and the region can afford of how we can recycle those things for future use. And I think that that's something that kind of really needs to get embedded into our culture, that we don't just think of materials as having a linear lifespan. You know, we extract material from the earth, we import it generally into the region, and we consume it once and there it dies. We need to really get our culture into one thinking that everything has a second or a third life to it. And most things do. The same lithium ion batteries with decent extraction, you can recover as much as 60 or 70% of that material. And I think that we really do need to focus on those sort of things. And my last and final point is that I find that the government tackles the issues. They do a great job of reaching out and becoming, working with the UNDP, and the private sector does their work as well too. What I don't see is a group effort, so to speak. I don't see the government sitting down at the very early discussions with the private sector, with the education sector, with health, with culture, and figuring out, well, these are the goals we want to achieve. How are we as a group, because we're all in this together, how are we all going to achieve these things? And what role is government going to play? What role is the private sector going to play? And to try and fix these problems. I find right now we're all kind of working in our own bits and ways, and we do communicate, but that communication is, hey, what do you think about this? Rather than, this is a goal we're going at. Let's scour the earth for a solution and work together to bring that solution to our region. And I think that that's one thing that I would really like to see going forward, and that certainly I can speak on behalf of the BNA, that we're very interested in having conversations with any government or sector at the very early stages to define the goals and the roles we're each going to play to get to those goals. So that's my bit for the day. I'm sorry for a bit of a ramble, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Great food for thought. It's perfect how what you've discussed here relates very nicely with what Patrick was discussing. I'm sure that we are going to get some positive feedback already. I can see in the chat that we do have some responses. Ms. Peggy Antrobus has actually said, thanks, John. Good to hear the representative from the BMA recognize economic inequality in Barbados and the need for an approach that is more sensitive to this, as well as to environmental damage. Good recommendations, which hopefully your association will be addressing in partnership with government. So I'm seeing really good responses so far, so thank you for that. So now we would like to hear from our third panelist, and I'm going to call on Ms. Carrie-Ann Eiffel, the former President of the Senate and currently the President of the Barbados Council for the Disabled. Today we are discussing diversity in terms of how we can, and inclusivity, very importantly. And I think that it is important that we hear from groups that could otherwise be seen as marginalized groups. We really do not want to leave anyone behind. And so it is a pleasure to have you with us today, Carrie-Ann, and we look forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Ms. King-Brathwaite, fellow panelists and guests. When I was invited to be a part of this meeting, the invitation, it was worded like this: how can we discuss inclusion without including persons with disabilities? And that is where I would like to begin today. We cannot discuss an inclusive recovery post-COVID-19 without recognizing that we have been given an opportunity through pain, through adversity, through many, many difficulties. From Mr. Mccaskey, we've heard about all of the economic downturns and the challenges and how our government has tried to face them head on. We've heard from Mr. Marshall about other impacts and other ways to mitigate the damages. But what we need to realistically look at as well is how the opportunities coming out of the events of the past 2 painful years have granted us a chance to rearrange a world that is inclusive of all its citizens, especially the most vulnerable communities. So that is where I want to begin. Back in 2015, with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, persons with disabilities were extremely thrilled to find that unlike the MDGs, disabilities were mentioned 11 times throughout the goals. Each goal does not speak specifically to the needs of persons with disabilities, but by the very nature and design of the 17 SDGs, the issues related to persons with disabilities have been addressed. One such statement, which encourages us to envision the world post 2030, says this: a newly implemented 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals holds a deep promise for persons with disabilities everywhere. And it goes on to list 3 goals, 3 methods, I should say, by which this inclusion can be achieved. I'm sorry about that. That's my cell phone that decided as soon as I open my mic to ring. And it encourages us in many different ways throughout the various sectors of the SDGs as to how we can implement and recognize this world that we want to see. What does inclusive recovery post-COVID-19 mean to persons with disabilities? Let's take a brief look at some of these areas, which will come out, I'm sure, throughout the further discussions in this consultation. So I do not wish to dwell too hard on it. I want persons to, however, reflect on the fact that through the necessity of going online, as many businesses have had to do, remote working options for persons who may otherwise have struggled to find methods of getting to work, of participating in daily jobs, in daily careers, we have recognized that these are no longer necessary barriers to employment for persons with disabilities. Services that were heretofore kept strictly face-to-face are now offered online, affording persons with disabilities to take charge of their livelihood, take charge of their independence, take charge of many aspects of their lives that was withheld from them in the past. And there are many other examples. But here in Barbados, what does this mean? It means that as we are a tourism-based economy, we have many other sectors into which we are branching, many other areas that we are investigating, and others that we are attempting to build out and make stronger post-COVID-19. However, one bedrock of our sustainability economically is tourism. And through sustainable tourism, we need to ensure that persons with disabilities are part of the process. As the world begins to travel again, as the world begins to venture out again, persons with disabilities who have had even more isolation, because many of us lived in isolation prior to COVID-19's onset. Post this environment, many of us will now be able to come out and want to and need to, for our mental stability, for many other reasons, to travel. And these are options that Barbados can explore further in order to embrace the community of persons with disabilities. That would therefore redound to the benefit of Barbadians who live with disabilities, because when we build out a sustainable tourism product, we build out a sustainable Barbados economically, an accessible Barbados, or as we like to say at the Barbados Council for the Disabled, a fully accessible Barbados. But again, that is only one of the areas in which our needs can be addressed. There are many others. Healthcare needs. The deficits in our healthcare situation during the COVID-19 pandemic was even more exacerbated and even more challenging for persons living with disabilities. Telehealth solutions do not work often for persons who have limited access to telecommunication devices and ICTs. We don't have, but telehealth offers opportunities for persons with disabilities to independently address their healthcare needs. Again, recovery must include solutions to afford more of these realities. And there are others. As most of our financial transactions became an online platform, again, the deficits for persons with disabilities were highlighted. However, as we recraft what it means to do business in this digital era, we have opportunities to ensure that the products we serve, the products that we share, the products that we offer to our community of persons includes the needs of our citizens with disabilities. Imagine the frustration of someone who lives on fixed limited incomes, who can no longer get out to the post office to cash their benefits checks, who no longer has the neighbor who is willing to stop by and collect the check to take it to the bank, decides to sign up with our financial institutions for online banking, only to find there are further barriers restricting them from enjoying this smell, this taste, this opportunity for financial independence. These are but a few of the areas in which we as persons with disabilities have found that a post-COVID-19 recovery can and must include our needs in order to ensure that we build back stronger, that we build back better, that more importantly, that we build back an inclusive reality. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie-Anne, and always for being the voice of those with disabilities. Certainly, COVID has taught us many things, and thank you very much for highlighting the levels of inequality that the globe has recognized have definitely increased because of COVID-19. Now to introduce our next panelist, Ms. Adriana Thomas. Adriana is the International PAHO Consultant, Coordinator, PAHO WHO Office of the Subregional Program Coordination here in the Caribbean. Adriana, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Donna. And just to add to the introduction, I'm also the coordinator for the Regional Climate Change and Health EU CARIFORUM project. And I'd also like to, good morning to all. Please note that all protocols are observed. Thank you for inviting the Pan American Health Organization to participate in this very and timely national consultation and to address the aspect of sustainable and inclusive recovery post-COVID-19. Sustainable and inclusive recovery post-COVID-19 is connected to health and the environment. Hence, the One Health approach to address issues around the human-animal ecosystem health interface is important. It's important in informing strategic approaches to the post-COVID-19 recovery in the region. The pandemic has taught us many lessons, one of which is the need to reposition health in all policies and ensure that an all-sector approach is prioritized. It underscores the need for greater collaboration to address the social and environmental determinants of health. The One Health approach is the mechanism for fostering coordination and collaboration between human, animal, plant, and environmental health to guard against current and future threats across these areas. The PAHO Agenda for the Americas on Health, Environment, and Climate Change 2021 to 2030 was developed towards enabling the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 3, good health and well-being. The agenda focuses on improving the performance of environmental public health programs and institutions, fostering environmentally resilient and sustainable health systems, and promoting environmentally healthy and resilient cities and communities. Its development was informed by the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, among other considerations, and presents the agenda for the Americas on health, environment, and climate change 2021-2030 to 2030. It is essentially a call to action to the health sector to lead the charge to address environmental determinants of health in the Americas, including the Caribbean. The Pan American Health Organization will continue to work with member states to achieve their goals and objectives relative to health and well-being. Another important document for informing post-COVID-19 focus and planning is the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy Recovery from COVID-19, which highlights 6 prescriptions and actionables for a healthy and green recovery. While societies need to protect themselves and recover as quickly as possible, it is important to note that we cannot go back to the way things were done before. Neglecting environmental protection, emergency preparedness, health systems, and social safety nets are areas which have to be integrated into development thinking, planning, design, and implementation in more deliberate ways. Prescription 1 focuses on protecting and preserving the source of health, which is nature. Prescription 2 emphasizes the importance of investing in essential services, from water and sanitation to clean energy in healthcare facilities. Prescription 3 urges a quick and healthy energy transition. Prescription 4 promotes healthy, sustainable food systems. Prescription 5 underscores the critical importance of building healthy, livable cities, while Prescription 6 urges action to stop using taxpayers' money to fund pollution. For example, placing a price on polluting fuels, along with the damage caused with approximately half outdoor air pollution deaths, cut greenhouse gas emissions by over a quarter and raise about 4% of global GDP in revenue. Additionally, in the more regional context, PAHO launched in 2021 the Agenda for the Americas on Health, Environment, and Climate Change, and builds on the actions and commitments in the Sustainable Health Agenda for the Americas 2018 to 2030 and the Sustainable Plan of the Pan American Health Organization 2020 to 2025, and aims to support member states in the region to improve the performance of environmental public health programs and institutions, foster environmentally resilient and sustainable health systems, and promote environmentally healthy and resilient cities and communities. I would like to invite you to explore these documents further and engage us in PAHO on their implementation and how the various sections of society could become more involved in our programs, projects, and activities. The Caribbean Action Plan on Health and Climate Change was essentially developed around 4 strategic lines of action: empowerment, supporting health leadership in SIDS, to engage nationally and internationally, evidence, building the business case for investment, implementation, preparedness for climate risk and health promoting mitigation policies and resources, facilitating access to climate and health finance. Further, according to the 2017 PAHO Country Survey on Health and Climate Change, ministers of health raised the following priority actions that should be addressed to best tackle climate change and health challenges. Prioritize health issues in the climate change agenda and in the preparation of reports, plans, and other national documents. Increase the number of trained and dedicated staff for health and climate change issues. Increase national and health sector budget allocations for climate change actions and programs. Receive support for navigating the complex processes to access international and bilateral funds. And 5, increase and improve data generation and results sharing to support national and regional evidence-based interventions. The Caribbean Action Plan aims to address these priorities. Additionally, one of the flagship projects in the region as a practical mechanism for implementing the Caribbean Action Plan on Health and Climate Change is the EU CARIFORUM Strengthening Climate Resilience Health Systems in the Caribbean project. That's the project I'm coordinating. This project brings together the interdisciplinary team for organizations working across the Caribbean and incorporates novel systems, It establishes new climate and health-related data sources, creates linkages between health and climate information, trains future leaders in addressing climate and health, and promotes awareness and action among strategic target populations. The project has 4 key outputs: adapt and pilot PAHO WHO tools to estimate health benefits of mitigation policies and interventions, comprehensive health chapter in National Adaptation Plan for Climate Change, improve surveillance capacity of and by professionals working in the health sector and health determining sectors, including through the development of climate-informed integrated systems and protocols to monitor selected environmental determinants of health. For example, heat, water, and sanitation, as well as health diseases, zoonosis, vector-borne and foodborne diseases, and COVID-19, and strong, effective climate change leadership among officials, CSOs, NGOs, communities, youth, civil society, and private sector, championing and implementing the One Health approach. Key partners and key partners and stakeholders in the implementation of this project are CARICOM, CARFA, the 5 Cs, University of the West Indies, CIMH, along with other universities and organizations. Its implementation covers 16 countries in the region, and it is hoped that these strategies, plans, programs, projects, and activities highlighted above will better enable the region to leave no one behind. Better enabling systems to better enable systems, for example, surveillance systems, institutions, and building the necessary capacities to reduce inequalities, build greater resilience and responsiveness, and generally sustainability and a more inclusive society or economy in a post-COVID-19 era. Thank you. I'll be happy to participate in the discussion session.
Thank you so very much, Adriana. Again, thanks for joining us. Thank you too for laying out what the regional response has been to making sure that we start on the path to recovery as it relates to COVID-19. Very informative. Happy to hear as well about the climate change infusion, so to speak, into health matters. I know that Barbados has been working very closely through the Ministry of Health and Wellness for years now on incorporating climate resilience into health matters. So it is good to hear that regionally we are continuing on that path, and we're happy to get to know you as well. So panelists, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you for your inputs thus far. And I just want to share a couple of comments before we get into the discussion. And I'm hoping that these points will also fuel our discussion as we go forward. To acknowledge what Marcia Brandon has added to in the chat, we need to engage people in our communities to get creative ideas. We have some great inventors sleeping their lives away because they are left behind and putting their energies into non-productive avenues. We cannot continue leaving most of our people behind. It is not sustainable, as we have seen over the years. So many people are not engaged, and they might have solutions which can add significant value. We need different ways of engaging people. And I have to say that she's not at all wrong in that comment. I have to agree. We do have to find new and innovative ways in getting everybody at the table. I believe that this was something that Mr. Marshall that John also mentioned, how do we get to have sort of cultural inputs that would be suitable to support our own recovery here in Barbados? And coming from Professor Mahan today, he's saying further to Mr. Marshall's input, sustainable recovery will require full participation from all quarters, government, private sector, and civil society. There is a great deal of civil society activity in Barbados, as evidenced by the numerous NGOs, although few appear to be vocal lobbyists and monitors. Furthermore, these organizations are largely uncoordinated, and groups with similar goals and aims often are not working together. Regenerate Barbados started in 2021 with the aim of providing a platform where various organizations could collaborate on issues of common concern. What needs to be done to get civil society working together in Barbados and playing the critical roles of watchdogs and also implementers? How do we mobilize and motivate civil society? Thank you very much for that as well, Robin. That perhaps will be the million-dollar question going forward, not just as we look and reflect on Stockholm Plus 50, but certainly in addressing sustainable development among SIDS and more specifically for Barbados. So I don't know if either of the panelists wants to respond to those comments at this stage, or if there's anyone else in the audience. I'm searching now to see if there are any hands up. I mean, I can choose somebody.
I would like to address the point on how to get civil society involved.
Yes.
I think first of all, it is important that we understand the cross-sectorial context of the region in terms of the various sectors and the roles each sector play. And so the civil society sector is really driven by values. And in terms of stimulating or engaging the civil society sector, it is important, I believe, that the other players in the space, in the region, the development arena, also, I heard you mention the involvement of civil society, but not necessarily in the area of advocacy and monitoring. And that's one of the fundamental roles of civil society, is to do advocacy and to monitor, because that's how the governments, for example, and international organizations, they're driven by rights, while on the private sector is driven by profits, while on the other hand, the civil society sector is driven by values. So I think there must be an understanding and an acceptance of the core role that each sector plays, and that each sector is given that space, civil society in this context, to advocate for values. When rights are not being met, that they have that space in the region to be able to advocate for, let's say, for rights to be met, for example. And I think once we can provide that space for civil society, then they would become more and more involved and more confident to participate. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Adriana. I'd like to ask Dr. Marcia Hines, please, as our headline respondent today, for her thoughts as well on what we're discussing so far. Marcia, welcome, and it's good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too, Donna. It has really been a lot of food for thought, as you have been saying, and some of the major reflections that I have. I think that while we can be happy about the gains that we've made in Barbados in terms of our rankings and so, I think we also need to pay some attention to the lived experience of people. So what are individuals on the street saying about these programs that we're implementing? Because I feel sometimes like we have too wide of a gap between our rankings and what they look like and the lived experience of individuals on the ground. In terms of, again, our strides with governance, and I think it follows on well from the question you had just now in terms of the third sector, where does the third sector fit? I think we still need to do more to define a clear space for the third sector as one of the important actors in this whole question of sustainability and moving our world forward to what we want to see. I don't think that we should use COVID or blame COVID for how far out from the SDG goals we are. The reality is that at many intervals, we were not on course to meet these goals by 2030. And COVID obviously has now further pushed us back from that, but it's not the only thing that would have pushed us back from it. Inclusivity as a term has to be decolonialized. So we're talking about being an inclusive society, but that is still, our understanding of what that is still very colonial. And so how do we move ourselves past that colonial understanding of inclusivity? Diversification of the economy will require total educational reform. And so I liked the point that was made by many of the panelists that these things that we're talking about cannot be done in silos. We've tried that siloed way of working. It is not successful. So we need to understand that even as we're talking about the economy on one side, we're talking about education on the other side, and where those things did not necessarily exist in the same conversation before, they definitely have to exist in the same conversation now. Disaster management is going to be an important feature, and several of our panelists touched on it. And I think it is important here to think about and talk about how data and statistics can support data management. I just wanted to talk very quickly about the two weather events we had in Barbados in 2021, one in June and one in July. And there was a sample of information about individuals whose houses had been impacted. The total sample size was 1,318, and just about 50% of the sample were female. Now, out of that sample, we got some very interesting information. And I think if we're talking about how we are going to mitigate climate change and some of the stuff that we've talked about today, this kind of data is going to be important. Data collecting it is going to be important. Analyzing it is going to be important. And then making sure that whatever we do and whatever our response is going to be totally driven by what the numbers are saying. So 664 of the houses that were affected were female-led houses. The average household had at least 2 children and 3 adults. 45% of the houses were in a state of disrepair and needing significant repair before the disaster. 33% of houses were either majorly damaged or destroyed or unable to be accommodated by their occupants. 90% of the houses were uninsured. More than 80% of the houses had not started repairs or were unable to start repairs without the support of the government. So when we really think then about gender and the importance of gender and the importance of social justice, I think those figures give us a really clear picture of what it is that we're talking about and thinking about and some of the changes that we need to create. I was very happy to hear one of the panelists go right to cut straight to it. Capitalism as a model no longer works for us. But the difficulty with that in the Caribbean is that capitalism is historically all we know as an economic system. So that is simplistic and complex all at the same time, because we're saying we want to change, but really and truly everything we know in terms of the creation of the island of Barbados has been based on capitalism and is capitalist. So when we are having that discussion, the magnitude of that discussion is historical, it's cultural. We have to think about Beckles and Williams and Rodney and people who have really studied and talked about it for a very long time. The idea about incorporating the youth, brilliant again. A part of this forum that we're talking about here today says that we're making a promise to them and understands and recognizes that they are the people with the most to lose. So we shouldn't really only incorporate them, but we should listen to them and we should take guidance from them. And again, all of those are things that will be new and different feelings, okay? Social justice, again, and individuals with disabilities. There is still too much capacity within the society of the differently able that we are not using. We need to put individuals to work. We need to create space within our society to make sure that they too can make the contribution that they can make, but that we are not allowing them to make because we are not creating the mechanisms. So when we are talking about sustainability has to be using everything that we have to make sure that everything is productive. So I think those are the things that stuck out to me the most. The takeaway, I think, is that Goal 5, this idea of gender equality, this idea of social justice, this idea, like I said, of decolonializing inclusiveness has to be an important part of whatever we're doing going forward, because I think it is one of the points where we have gotten stuck on our performance, and we have to fix that to be able to move forward in another way.
Thanks very much, Marcia. A very good overview of our discussion so far. And you've actually provided us with some national context with regards to resilience and gender. And I think our discussions will probably have to go on beyond today's presentation, but excellent food for thought. And thanks very much for your intervention. I have a question specifically, and perhaps, and I'm looking at how can policy programming, how can the policy programming system be enhanced? You know, what sorts of practices can we perhaps implement going forward based on the lessons learned from the past 2 years? And Patrick, we're going to come straight at you, Patrick Mccaskey, if that's okay, to engage us on this question.
Yes, in terms of you're relating to policy development, and I must say that in Barbados, we have a well-developed policy paradigm. Policy is developed through the consultative process. We have, as you know, the social partnership. Barbados has a strong record and history of social partnership, where matters of, issues of that affect, Barbadians at the micro and macro level are brought and discussed at the level of social partnership. And it is from there that, it is taken on board by policymakers. Right? I don't know if we are not doing well in that regard. I think we are doing extremely well in that regard. The involvement of civil society is also a part of this framework. We have had, in terms of developing specific policies, we have had, numerous national consultations over the years, so that, the average Barbadian could, put in their 5 cent worth, so to speak, in turn before policies are rolled out. So I think that, we are doing pretty well there. And if you have any, comments to make on it that you feel that we should, improve, then, please let me know at this stage. I will try to communicate it to my peers.
Thanks very much for that, Patrick. Any other thoughts from anyone in the audience regarding perhaps how we can, look to improve current policies and programs? I'm just seeing if there are any hands up at this time. Okay. I know Travis Sinclair is on this call, and he has a focus on policy. I also see Dr. Brewster in. Travis, are you there?
Hi, and thank you, moderator. I also see Crystal Drake's hands up as well, and Ms. Antrobus. So I'll be very quick. No, I just want to the point Patrick raised in terms of Barbados's consultation process into that policy space. I mean, sometimes Barbados might be blamed for overly, consulting. We just came through the whole coastal zone policy and a range of other instruments. But what I think is, if I could say a way to improve on that, even as we look at the social partnership and the construct of the social partnership, Robin made a point about that broader civil society platform. I do agree that we need to find ways to formalize their engagement, even how I think to support them in terms of building their advocacy power, etc. Because it only redounds into enhanced governance, improved governance. But the social partnership, I think there was discussion around expanding that. And that perhaps is something that we can look at, something that Patrick, as you roll out, how to get that to be a more diversified group. Yes, its strong interest is social and economic issues, but even the wider, there's some wider challenges, I think, that this country, Marsha alluded to some of them as well, and to get those voices in. The other thing as well, this discussion around constituencies, and there was something, I believe it was the Ralph Commission in terms of local governance, how those things are joined up into national governance. I think that's important. And I think, hello, Donna, sorry?
That was not me. I'm just checking if he's not muted.
Okay.
Please continue.
Okay, sorry, right. So in terms of how you get these things to join up into the national planning process is important. One last point, I know Patrick's focus is the new National Development Plan. And I think if we needed acid tests for all of these things is how we get those systems working to have that inclusive development planning framework. Over.
Thanks very much, Travis. I'm going to go straight on to Ms. Antrobus, please. Peggy Antrobus, I see.
Thank you very much. I just put in the, thank you very much, Donna. I just put in the chat to remind us, because of the theme of this, prosperity for all, to say, remind us that for women and children, prosperity is not enough, not when we continue to be vulnerable to violence. And I just want to make a more general statement now, specifically about the pandemic. I want to focus on the pandemic. So for me, the pandemic really, really showed up the inequalities. It showed up our dependence on caregivers and communities to keep things going. It showed up the importance of health systems, the need to upgrade schools, to allow children to learn from home, supply chain issues, and food security. Specifically, I think in the recovery, we need to give tangible support to caregivers and communities, including consideration of introduction of something like a universal basic income, a restructuring of national security so that it meets the needs of all the people, not just a small group of people who are employed and have regular incomes, and the need for comprehensive services and legislation to address domestic violence. Other people can speak more about that, particularly Marsha Hines, but I just want to put that on the table, that when we talk of recovery, we need to recognize what it is the pandemic has shown up and how we are going to address those inequalities specifically in terms of caregivers and communities that kept us going through the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention, Ms. Antrobus. Very, very good intervention indeed. Marsha, do you have any response here or at this stage?
Sorry, yes, thank you. I actually, of course, I mean, I agree with Peggy. Peggy has been in this game for a very long time. I think too that when we are looking for the models that we can use for some of the supports and so that Peggy was talking about, we still have information that was developed by women like the Dawn Collective, right? The book Development Crises and Alternative Vision, which is, I think, a 1980s publication, but it has so much information and so much roadmap. So just to remind us as well as we are having this conversation, because I know it is a lot, and at some point it is going to begin to feel like a lot, but there is also a lot of ideas and a lot of scholarship that we haven't even barely tapped into in terms of solving our problems and in terms of refining our problems as Caribbean people. And information that is not just available, but that was created for us by us. And so I think, you know, just the takeaway is that we don't have to start from scratch with all of this. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And there are places that we can begin to look for the ideas and for the models that we need.
Thanks very much, Marcia. Very clear as well. I'm going to ask Crystal Drakes. I believe, Crystal, you had some points that you wanted to make or some queries as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Donna. I'm really enjoying the discussion that we're having so far. I just wanted to make reference to the interventions regarding the social partnership and in terms of the consultative process. And what we're hearing coming out of a lot of these discussions is the need for greater advocacy. People cannot advocate for things they do not know. There's a missing link as well coming out of areas like the social partnership, which I agree with Travis and Robin. There needs to be greater representation on that partnership. In addition to that, there needs to also be some form of reporting to the public of Barbados. You can't have a social partnership where there's a vacuum of information in relation to the decisions or the points of view coming from the various sectors. I, for one, I'm not aware of any medium or modality by which the public of Barbados is on a regular basis, I should say, you know, easy information, easy messaging that can let Barbadians know, you know, this is the position of, let's say, those who represent labor, if we broaden the scope, the environment, but at the moment it is too restrictive in terms of the thinking because, again, as Marcia said and as John said, that social partnership is also based on a capitalist society. So if we are saying that there's something wrong with the capitalist society and how it is represented, then we have to look at all other systems so that we move towards a more holistic way of governance. So I just wanted to make that intervention. Thank you so much, Donna.
Thanks a lot, Crystal. Certainly an integrated approach is something that we continue to discuss. And without an integrated approach, unless we do away with the silos, which was a point made earlier by one of our other participants, we will not move towards sustainable development. And you're absolutely right there. Thank you so much. I've got another query. This time, and I believe, Patrick, I might be coming at you again. So here goes. How can small island developing states, SIDS, such as Barbados, position themselves to participate in a resource-efficient, low-carbon global economy? And what are the sectors to take us there? And what are the specific measures needed to support this transition? I'll repeat the question, Patrick, and as well for the benefit of our other participants, because we'd really like to hear from all of you on this. How can SIDS, such as Barbados, position themselves to participate in a resource-efficient, low-carbon global economy? What are the sectors to take us there? And what are the specific measures needed to support that transition? Beginning with you, Patrick. Hi, Patrick, we're not hearing you. You may need to unmute. Hi. Patrick, could you please unmute? Yes. Or oopsie. Okay, in the meantime, I'm seeing John Marshall's hand up. John, would you like to tackle this question? Oh, go ahead. And then Patrick, we'll come back to you.
No, you can go to Patrick. That is
okay,
a tough
fine.
question to answer. So I was going to come in afterward. Okay.
Thanks, Patrick. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question? I'm not clear on the question.
Absolutely. So it's got three parts. So I'm going to try to break it down. First of all, how can SIDS, small island developing states like Barbados, position themselves or position ourselves to participate in a resource-efficient, low-carbon global economy? And the follow-up would be what sectors should take us there and what specific measures would support this transition?
Okay, well, right. This question, you know, squarely relates to the issue of climate change, right? And as we all know, is one of the most urgent developmental challenges that we have. And cities, as you know, are, the cities have special and peculiar structural characteristics that makes them even more vulnerable than other countries because of these special characteristics. For example, lack of resources, limited institutional structures, and limited access to finance and capital and so on. So for us to be able to respond more effectively, it is these challenges that we need addressed by countries who are better able to do so. Most of the challenges that we face have not been our fault. We find ourselves, being takers of, these things. So basically, what I'm saying here is that the main objective of a low carbon economy is to, we need to reduce the emissions. We need development of these resource efficient low carbon economy. It will require, therefore, effective, tripartite cooperation, as I mentioned earlier, and also greater collaboration as well. The key strategies for resource efficiency include, for example, effective waste prevention and management, also water use and water waste management. The achievement of a low carbon society must therefore be based on boosting energy security, also reducing fossil fuel dependence. The Barbados national energy policy is in the right direction, which is designed, as you know, to produce 100% renewable energy and carbon neutrality by 2030. This must be pushed, and the provision of reliable, safe, affordable, sustainable, modern, and climate energy services, also zero domestic consumption of fossil fuel, maximizing local participation in renewable and minimizing related foreign exchange outflows. Also in the area of transportation, agriculture and manufacturing, they present, you're talking with sectors here, present very important opportunities for the achievement of this, resource efficient low carbon economy. But resources are at the core of our challenge. We need resources, and that's why access to grant funding and concessional financing is very urgent. We have already, and as I mentioned, there's the energy efficiency plan. The growth and development plan of 2007 clearly outlines Barbados's green economy framework, and we are currently now looking at, as Travis would know, in crafting a new growth and development strategy that will clearly identify the sectors that would help us to transition to the low efficient carbon economy. I must say that you all may not know, but I was a member of the board of the Green Climate Fund back in 2015, representing SIDS. And we have established there a number of frameworks that SIDS can take advantage of. For example, the readiness framework, which give us the opportunity to establish our national designated authority office, and from there we can, formulate strategic plans and so on to, position ourselves to more effectively access grant funding. There's a lot of grant funding out there. We must go after it. Once we can get these funds, we would be better able to, achieve, as I say, our constraint as a city is lack of financial resources and institutional capacity. And we must build in these areas if we are to truly achieve these goals that we have in terms of resource efficiency and so on.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Patrick, for your intervention. John, you also have a response to this question. Please go ahead.
Well, I just want to say this, that from my, I guess, outside perspective on the public sector, and the general way we as a Caribbean region sort of approach these things, I find that, perhaps we do look a lot to the UN and US, Canada, and other industrialized nations for the answers to how to solve these particular problems. However, I do think that, I have faith that we know enough of what we need to know to fix these problems ourselves. And while I appreciate all that is done for us by other institutions around the world, I think that we've come to the point where we need to be a bit more self-resilient and self-reliant on trying to solve these problems. And I have full faith that we have the skills in-house across your region to try and deal with these things. So, for instance, I see, in my positions in both working at the BMA and Harris Paints that I work for, I see public sector employees stretched pretty thin, as we as a nation try to shake the hand of every association and country out there to try and be a good friend and neighbor. And that's great. It's just that it does stretch them thin and perhaps takes a little bit of the focus away from, the work that they should be doing in trying to bring different groups within the countries together, both the educational sector, the private sector, the health sector, all of us together to try and solve these problems. I think that would be a better use of their time, perhaps a lot. And just on another note, for instance, you mentioned there about how can we solve something. A general thing that I go by is that if there is a particular food item that we can't grow across your region, then we probably shouldn't be eating it. In terms of resilience, we have more than enough resource within Guyana, Trinidad, and Jamaica to produce much of the food that we need, and we could produce a lot of the other bits that we need here in Barbados. Barbados suffers because of rainfall, although not today. And a lot of the other islands suffer because of their geology and the steep slopes and so on. But there is enough resource within the Caribbean for us to grow the foods that we need. And I think that that's one thing that we should, as a region, try and support, that we, if anything, try and make sure that we source all of our foods regionally.
Thanks, John. But while I have you engaged now, I have a question for you directly. Would you say that consumers are ready to support green businesses, certainly in Barbados?
I would say that they are, and I'll give you another anecdote to that as well too. I work at Harris Paints, and paint has an environmental impact, obviously, and there's the general metric that you use to measure that is the VOCs within paint. And the Southern California is typically held as the world's sort of benchmark when it comes to places where they've put the most emphasis on reducing VOCs in paint and regularizing the use of paint in certain areas and so on. And when I have asked paint companies who work in those markets over the last 30, 40 years, how did they get to the state that they were in now? They said that they started out trying to educate and encourage the population to try and buy the right product, but people are slow to change, right? And that's the truth. And the only way that it ended up changing was when they then collaborated with the governments to create the policies to in both incentivize the use of lower VOC paint and penalize the use of higher VOC paints, so that there was both an education from the industry and regulations from the government that helped to drive that change in the consumer habits. And I think that from our perspective, for a lot of the things that we know that we need to do, that's the sort of collaboration it's going to take. It can't be a single sector trying to do it on its own.
Thanks for that, John. Lani, I know that you're present with us, and I'm going to ask you the same question. Are consumers ready to support green businesses?
Good morning, everyone. It's still only 5 to 12.
Indeed. Go
ahead,
sir.
Yes, I think they are absolutely. John's right. It's just that some people may not know that there's green options out there still. So there's still a bit of outreach we have to do, although that's been happening over the years internationally, which has helped locally. And, you know, with the switch to more biodegradable containers and bags and things like that, I think that that's really kind of made more people aware of why we're doing it and asking more questions. And I think as long as prices of green options stay relatively the same as the other options, that absolutely businesses and private individuals are more than willing, especially those that are aware of the benefits of using them, are definitely more willing to purchase green products. Definitely, yeah. And the Green Business Program at the Future Center that I started with you, Donna, with your help many years ago, is still going strong and has businesses continuing to buy into that concept of also using it as a marketing, a way to market themselves differently from the rest of the companies in their same area. So it is growing slowly and has been growing slowly for about 10 years now, 12 years in Barbados. So I see things just continuing along that track as they're also doing worldwide.
Thanks for that response, Lani. And yes, we have been on the green business roll now for what, 12 to 15 years. So happy that it's still going at the level of an NGO, at the level of Future Center. Okay, so there are a couple of things that have to happen, but related to question 6 is another question, well, the question that I just posed, and that is, how can we encourage more socially responsible and environmentally friendly business in Barbados and the Caribbean? How can we encourage more socially responsible and environmentally friendly business in Barbados and the Caribbean? John, your hand is up. Is that a legacy hand, or are you going to answer this question or be participating?
It is, but I can still try to answer the question. And to be honest with you, it's not that difficult a question to answer, because the truth is, from a Barbadian and original perspective, we've already done it. You know, we don't really, I won't necessarily say pat ourselves in the back, but we don't give ourselves enough credit for, you know, the fact that no household in Barbados uses, you know, grid power to heat their water. Mm-hmm. Generally, everybody uses the sun to do that. And that's just a norm for us. We don't even look past it. But that's a great thing that was done, because it was a private enterprise, but also supported by, you know, various concessions and so on from the government for, you know, for your house and your income and so on, to try and help you do that. And I think that, you know, we can use models like that going forward to try and make the change happen. And, you know, it doesn't take as much as we might think it would to make that change permanent to the point where we are now, where we don't really second guess it. It's just a norm for us to accept that we're going to put panels on our house to try and heat our water.
Thanks, John. And for that question, I'm also going to engage David Bino. David, are you still on the call? I'm not seeing David. Yes, David. David, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear from you regarding how can we encourage more socially and environmentally friendly businesses in Barbados and the region. If you are hearing me, yes, you're there. Please go ahead, David. Thanks.
Thank you, Donna. Unfortunately, I was on another call.
Sorry.
Yes. I think that this is a very important question in terms of how we're going to be able to engage persons and get them on board. Businesses are largely encouraged by the ability to profit maximize, right? To maximize profits. And therefore, if you make it clear from an economic perspective that, you know, if you don't engage in business, in green business, that is actually bad for business. In other words, then your profits are not going to be maximized, you're actually reducing your profits. And how you do that is through policy regulation. So it's very important for Caribbean governments to recognize that any negative externalities in business, in terms of if you have a business that's polluting, if you have a business and it's causing environmental degradation, then that's what we call a negative externality. And the business is not necessarily incorporating that within their costs. And therefore they appear as though they're doing better than they really are from a social maximization perspective. So what we're saying is that policymakers need to look at these negative externalities, those areas where businesses are actually impacting the environment and society negatively, and ensure that these costs are captured by these businesses. And therefore, once these costs are captured, businesses are going to seek then to reduce these negative externalities, and therefore they're going to embrace green business in a more meaningful way. So that's on one side. That's where you're going to use the stick, right? But on the other side, we can use carrots. And therefore, we can offer certain incentives to businesses to green. So if you green your business, you're going to get rebates. If you green your business, you're going to get tax reductions. So this is the other side of policy. But beyond that, there is something called piloting and letting businesses see that this company who does paints, they green their business and their sales increase by 25%. Or this company who does manufacturing of houses, they green that business and their costs reduce by 10%. And that's why at the level of international partners and of government, and also in terms of civil society, because these businesses have umbrella organizations like the Manufacturing Association, which is present here, like the Small Business Association, like Chamber of Commerce, they need to pilot these examples so that businesses across the Caribbean can see, replicate, and scale up. So I think those three examples that I gave are really underscore the modalities in which we can actually encourage businesses to green within Barbados and within the Caribbean. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks very much for that, David. And I'm going to Danielle Bob. Danielle, again, the question is, how can we encourage more socially responsible and environmentally friendly businesses in Barbados and the Caribbean? And I'm coming to you because you represent the youth in the room at the moment. Over to you, Danielle, and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I like how you say represent the youth. I accept it. Thank you for the question. I think in looking at this question, for me, I'm not going to be encouraging a holistic approach because I realize that there are different size businesses. So they're different, they're large scale, they're medium level, they're small businesses. And so the approach is different. Going green, we have to understand the kind of economic backing and support that would require, the access to certain kinds of resources. Is the government in a position, or other development agencies in a position, to offer that kind of support to these businesses as they attempt to make this change into going green, being more environmentally friendly? We also need something, an initiative like this cannot occur just in the business sector. It cannot be something that the business sector alone is doing. You have to integrate it across all sectors in the society, including the education sector, starting from the schools, coming right up, going through the public sector, coming out in the private sector. I think oftentimes we put a lot of the emphasis or the work on the private sector, not realizing sometimes they cannot carry that load, but also they're going to deflect that to the members of society, right? The consumers in the society, and who are represented there, who are the ones mainly buying, who are the ones requiring certain services. Again, it goes back, the majority of the time, as research will show, would be to women within our societies. And we do not then take into consideration the kind of work that women have to engage in, the unpaid care work that comes with that, the kind of management that comes with that. So even an initiative like, for instance, the garbage disposal bins that were sent out across different communities, understanding how they work is important. And so that educational component is required, because we see a lot of persons in the communities also misusing them, not understanding what is taking place, using them for storage, using them for laundry, using them for other kinds of things. So accompanying those initiatives that private sectors will be incorporated is a need to educate and a need to bring public awareness to what it means, but also for us to bring in that gender analysis and understanding the diversity and the different levels, and how there are unequal relations of gender and unequal relations of power that affect the kind of different levels of access to those resources as well.
Great response, Danielle. Thanks very much. And for emphasizing not only the fact that there is continued inequality that we must address. We can't just have it as something that we gloss over, that we just mention. But in addition to that, education across the board and an all of sector approach to the need to understand why, green businesses and why these alternatives would be important. Thanks very much for your participation in that regard. We are going to have first of all, I just want to just to remind you that we did start late, and we're hoping to be able to continue to engage you at least until 12:15. I know that time is of the essence here, but we appreciate this discussion. You know that it's been rich. We really would like you to stay with us until about 12:15. And I'm going to endeavor to ensure that at 12:15 we will wrap up. At this time, I'm going to invite you just to participate in a very quick poll that you should see on your screens momentarily. And then we're going to continue with our discussion up until 12:15. Thank you very much. I think you can see the question on the screen. Are consumers ready to support green businesses? Interesting results coming there. Okay, Sam, how are we doing?
We have 15 responses out of 23 participants. So just maybe one more minute and then we're good.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, we are now at 18 responses. I am not sure if everyone has been able to participate or wants to participate, but I suggest that we end the poll now so we have a couple more minutes to discuss. You're on mute, Donna.
Yes, I realize. Thanks a lot, Sam. And it seems as though we have overwhelming support. Well, yes. 50% of respondents say that consumers are ready to support green businesses. 22% are thinking no, and we have a 28% who are unsure at this time. So thanks a lot for your participation. Okay, so now I am going to continue. And so I've got another question that relates to once we get into green businesses and once we start making everything greener. And I'm going to target Dr. Marcia Hines, if she's still with us. Marcia, for this, and any others that want to join after. But the question is, how do we prepare our labor force to participate in a greener, more sustainable and inclusive future? What are the green jobs of the future? What are the new skills needed from business, from government, and from academia? And I'm going to repeat it because I know it's a long question, and I'm hoping that others will be thinking of this as we go through and as Marcia makes her response. How do we prepare our labor force to participate in a greener, more sustainable, inclusive future? What are the decent green jobs of the future? Decent green jobs of the future. What are the new skills needed from business, from government, and from academia? Over to you, Marcia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting question. So I think, first of all, that this is one of the areas in Barbados that we are well positioned for, because we, under our, former Prime Minister Alpha, he did a lot of work in terms of turning Barbados into a services economy. So we know that a lot of our jobs in the services economy are, I would think, decent green type jobs. We do have some work to do with other sectors in terms of getting them there, but I think that we have a model and a template, and we know that Barbadian workers are still seen the world over as some of the brighter, better workers. So I do think that we have a little bit of a platform there to grow on. I think that we have to wean our dependence on exploitative sectors. So we haven't even talked about tourism today, but in a discussion like this, we have to talk about tourism and start to think about tourism and how we think about tourism. We also have to think about our want to be an oil producer or to drill for oil, all of these discussions that we do have, because at the end of the day, we can't talk about sustainability and being a more sustainable society and feel like this is the way forward. I also want to, in terms of academics, I think one of the things that we have to do is to make the old ways palatable, because I think a lot of the old ways were sustainable. So what do I mean by that? We, as inhabitants of the Caribbean space, have a rich culture and have a rich history, and some of the answers that we are looking for, I think, are actually back in that culture and back in that history. I think of how, my grandmother used to live. Everything had a purpose. After that purpose, things were repurposed. I remember my granny cutting the big oil bottles and making flower pots out of them. So I think that one of the things that academics can do is to begin to unlock more interest in our culture, more validity for the way that we do things as people. And then finally, to help to redefine, right? Because I guess we quote unquote have that power. So even when we talk about wealth in a discussion like this, we had Adriana talking about health. How do we start to think of wealth and the connection between wealth and health? And how do we start to encourage, or as you talk about our population of labor, when we look at Barbados and we look at our non-communicable diseases profile, how do we start to get our labor force to even recognize that sustainability and greenness begins personally, right? So I think that these are some of the things that we can do and some of the ways that academics especially can assist.
Thanks very much for that, Marcia. And Marcia, because we are really pressed for time, I'm going to ask you, as you are online, to give us 30 seconds in terms of a wrap up and your impressions of today's discussion. So please go ahead. I'm starting with
30
you.
seconds. a lot of potential in my little hometown. I think what we have to do is move all of our thoughts and talk into action. I think that is always where we've had a little bit of, a discrepancy in our society. But I think that if we create space for multiple individuals, like you said just now, the government, academics, and that kind of thing, to bring a little piece, we will get there eventually.
Thank you very much, Marcia, and thank you for joining us. Carrie Ann, as part of your wrap up, I do feel the need to ask you directly this same question. How can we prepare our labor force, especially among your community of disabled, our community of disabled persons? How do we prepare our labor force to participate in a greener, more sustainable, inclusive future? And as I said, please let this serve as part of your wrap up. Thank you.
My response to that is very simple. As I indicated in my presentation earlier, we have learned a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things we've learned is the opportunity for remote working, for other options in terms of accessing. To promote a greener work environment, it means less carbon emissions, it means less paper printing, it means more electronic basis to our workforce, it means broadening our reliance on agricultural options to doing things. And if we make our policy that we're persons with this, where we start implementing these projects, these programs, these employment opportunities, we try to include at least one person with a disability every time we hire a new crop, every time we open a new business, every time we start a green, or even in our case, it has a blue approach to employment opportunities, to developing, to building out our labor force, that we include persons with disabilities. We don't have to wait until government mandates us to do so, though legislation tending in that direction, some people have been saying that that would be useful. We don't have to wait until then. It is the economical, it is the socially responsible thing to do to ensure that our labor force includes persons with disabilities, and recognizing, like I said before, our reliance or inclusion of more electronic solutions to our systems, use them as well as means to create a more accessible and inclusive society. And those are my wrapping up words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie Ann. Fantastic response. Adriana, I'm coming to you next for your 30 seconds and for your wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you for inviting us from PAHO to participate in this extremely interesting and vibrant discussion. And my wrap-up is to make a recommendation for participants to visit our PAHO website to view some of the programs and projects that we are involved in at the moment, and to determine where you can become involved. And please feel free to contact us at PAHO. I'd also like to mention the WHO Manifesto for Healthy Recovery for COVID-19 and the 6 prescriptions and actionables. Some of them are very specific, and in terms of planning post-COVID-19 sustainability and inclusivity, these prescriptions and actionables can inform some of the work moving forward. So I just also like to wish you well. I've heard a lot about civil society engagement. Please, from an international organization perspective, I guess that we are also rethinking how do we engage civil society in more strategic ways to have more impact as it relates to our development results. So I'd just like to say that that thinking is currently going on in organizations like PAHO, for example. So once again, thank you for inviting us, and all the best.
Thank you so very much, Adriana. You are mentioning something that is very dear to us in this grouping, and I think across Barbados, and all of it is echoing the importance of major groups' involvement in activities and discussions and in processes such as this one, which is the Stockholm +50 process. So thanks again. And of course, for bringing a regional spin to what we are discussing. Very important. Thanks again. Next up, John, for your 30 seconds, please.
Okay. Well, just thanks very much again for inviting me. Very glad to be part of this discussion, and I would encourage everyone that, certainly from the BMA's perspective and, us at Harris Paints, that we're willing to sit at any table to have a discussion on how we can, manage our waste better and, and improve, right? And that involves not just the business, but the staff that work here, as Lani and others at the GBB know that we're willing and engaged to get that done. So we're here. Thank you.
Much appreciated, John, and thanks so much. And good wishes as well to your colleagues that you work with, and looking forward to seeing and hearing more of you as well. And finally, Patrick, if you don't mind, we'd like to hear from you for your last 30 seconds. And thanks again for being with us.
Yes, thank you all very much. This session has been, I consider information gathering, process for me, and it will certainly enrich us in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs in terms of having a better understanding of, the stakeholders and so on. The BERT plan, as you know, would have, laid the foundation for, sustainable inclusive growth. And I mentioned to you that we are working on, developing a growth and development strategy that will take us, a sustainable growth and development strategy that will take us down to 2030. One of the main planks of that plan will be the Roof to Reef project. The government has embarked on a very ambitious Roof to Reef project program, in which the objective basically is to make low and middle income homes more resilient to extreme weather events, and also to increase freshwater storage capacity, and also to reduce carbon emissions through the deployment of distributive energy generation, to decrease land use resources of marine pollution, implement more sustainable land use marine spaces, make critical utility water, sanitation, and road infrastructure more climate resilient, promote, reduce coral reef ecosystem services, and so on. We know that Mr. Ricardo Marshall, he's the program director on this project. He knows a lot more about it than me, and Travis and so on. He's very knowledgeable. So I want to say that this session has been very informative, and I think we need to talk a bit more with civil society. I've taken a lot of the concerns on board, and when we have a draft of our medium to long-term growth, sustainable growth strategy, we will hope to re-engage with you to ensure that your concerns are integrated in our strategic planning framework. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we are looking forward to that process that you've just announced. Thank you so much. I just wanted to very quickly look at the chat. I'm agreeing with George Gill and quite a few others. I think Marcia mentioned this as well, that we do indeed need action. And yes, Marcio Brandon also has echoed that. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to turn you over very quickly now to Ms. Crystal Drakes, who will give us a word of thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna. And I will just say a very warm thank you to everyone who participated. The panelists, I thought their interventions and their presentations were fantastic. And the Stockholm +50, we are now going through the first phase. And the insights from these consultations will inform the national report and then go on to inform the global report. But more importantly, as we have these discussions, Donna, I think you'll agree with me here, these discussions will inform how we move forward as a people. I think we are onto something where we can create the space that is needed for this level of engagement, particularly on the ground, and then obviously to inform action. So I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's event where we are going to be discussing under the theme Accelerating Sustainable Development and the Decade of Action. We have an excellent lineup of panelists again tomorrow, and I'm hoping that everyone who's on the call today can join us tomorrow. So thank you all. Have a good afternoon, and hopefully we will all be in touch in the near future. Thank you, everyone.
And thanks again. Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to those of you who can be here with us tomorrow. To be here at 10 o'clock, we promise to try to have a prompt start. And again, for the wonderful discussions that we've had, we need to keep this going. We do know that we do have a phase 2 of this process taking place between June and October. We would want to have all of you at the table as the discussion continues, and obviously finding new ways of turning all of this into action. Please stay safe, travel safely. If any of you who have to go on the road, we're still under flood warning, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you kindly, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Have a pleasant day.
Bye, all.